Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and it is Wednesday. It's May 18th. This will be our chart lesson for today, and you can see looking here at the daily chart that we got a really quick answer as to whether or not we were going to get any follow through on this buying. So they beat this thing. They took it all back in just one day here. I mean, there's that bar opened it. It basically opened almost on its high, 40.91 and a quarter, and it closed at 39.14. So quite a large move there. Uh, the only positive is the support still holding. That's where we kind of closed at today. We traded a little bit below that. Looks like we're trading a little bit below that now, but we're still inside this bar. So uh, we'll throw another dart at the board. Maybe we'll make a higher low here and go higher. I wouldn't count on it. This thing, every time you get a little bit of a bounce, the sellers, you can just see the sellers come in hard. They came in hard here, came in hard here, here. Then after this little rally, it came in just as hard again. So um, it looks like we're going through a distribution phase with the big guys, and um, they're basically selling is the way it looks to me. So anyway, there it is. There's a look at the daily. We're still way oversold real quickly again, but maybe this is the new normal. So we may find out with the volatility we may need to adjust this chart somewhat, but we'll wait on that because we don't have enough information to really confirm that yet, but we'll wait and see. So anyway, let's flip over to the intraday chart, and you can see how ugly it looks, and we'll go through the trades and wrap today up. Okay, here's a look at the intraday chart, the 2000 tick chart. You can see we started off on this really steep blue channel, which that's generally a little bit too steep, and you can see we had a break and looked like we might get a new low, but all we really did was fold over into a more sustainable trend. Usually a sustainable trend or a healthy trend is about a 45-degree angle, so they'll pretty much go from corner to corner of your chart, and this fits that much more. You can clearly see this one's a little bit too steep. So you'll see this a lot when you start off on a really strong trend and it looks like you get a break and may get a new low and it just keeps going. Generally what you'll find is there's a flatter channel. Now I did draw this channel off the first two swings here where the new trend down kind of started. There's another way to look at this that you probably could draw as well, maybe starting from there and drawing off that swing and then coming down to the lows. You can see that one fits fairly well as also, but I I tend to like using those first two swings, so that's why I drew it this way. And it does bounce off the low. We do get a break and a new low before we looked like we were going to rally out, and then we just kept going lower. So this is the way I played it. It does tend to fit well here, and it does cover the price action fairly well. So I stuck with my original one, but the other way, if you drew it the other way, I won't argue that you couldn't have used it as well. So, but anyway, let's zoom in, go through the trades, and you have to be patient today. And really, there's a lot of price action here early that's to the downside, but there's just not any real good setup. So, there's not much you can do about that. It's just the way it is sometimes. But anyway, 7 o'clock comes right across these lows here on this. Notice you got a break of your short-term channel and a new low, and then we actually get a failed breakout here. I marked this one green. It's really a second entry, but you got this congestion here, so I'm trading this more as a failed breakout. It actually breaks higher and fails and turns back down. You could go short here, or even on the engulfing bar. It was really kind of hard to know where the low of this was at this point. So you really don't know where the low is going to be. So I guess what I'm getting at is the key here is you got to have room to scalp out before hitting these lows, and you don't really know what your target's going to be. The only thing you might have done for a target is measure this leg and say, okay, I'm going to look for a measured leg. And you can see that would be right in there. And we didn't quite get that, so it didn't really give us a measured leg. But that would have given you a target somewhere down here to work towards. And you can see we got pretty close there. And actually we ended up going much lower, but notice how we went sideways there. So that would have given you a decent target to give you an idea. But that's really about all you could do there. So, but if you take this trade, it turns out to be a pretty nice trade. And depending on how you played it, if you get a runner, you get a nice runner out of that, and you might be done for the day. But generally, you want to wait on a lower high on a little breakout out of here. And if you thought we were coming off the lows, then you probably wouldn't take this trade at all. You'd wait till we got back to here. But it just didn't fit properly, and it was obvious that there was probably another low down here. So anyway, we dropped on down, and we're just working sideways. You might take that trade right there. It is a second entry short, first entry, and you come up here in second entry. But look at the congestion, and it breaks higher and fails and turns down, and you got to go short right into the midline here where you've bounced a few times. So I'm not crazy about that one. I didn't mark it. You might take that trade, but I don't see anything else here I like, and it just keeps going down. Then we're working up. And now you've pretty much got proof that your lows down here and your midlines in here, and you can kind of see it working. If you look back, you can see it working off that. So this looks pretty accurate to say you probably got a low here. And so we're probably headed back to the trend line. Now, sometimes if you start turning down at this midnight line multiple times, you might trade that. So, but notice you're working up here. You get a first entry, and then you get a second entry, and then there's also a hidden second entry in there too. So when it breaks lower there, you can treat that like a failure. The signal bar is not good enough for a second entry by itself. It's way too bullish. So, but the fact that you get the failure and a hidden second entry, maybe you take that trade. I marked it green. It's right at the EMA, right at the midline. Drops on down, and then we just start working sideways. So you got to assume we're probably trying to head over here, but this thing is weak by this point, really weak. So then, of course, you're working up. You get a close outside. You get a couple of swings up to a new high, and then you get this small, very bearish bar with a good bit of room back to the EMA. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere land, but this is played out, and you could also trade it as a failed break out of this little congestion here. Turns out there's a bigger range, but at the time that I drew this, there's clear congestion right here. So you can see that. And this is a failed break out of it. And so prices will probably at least come back to the EMA, and we could go lower. And you pretty much got two measured legs up there too. Actually, this leg's not quite as high, but that's because the market's pretty bearish. And you're only looking to get a scalp out of this maybe, but it just keeps going. And of course, we bounce at the support. And you get another second entry short here. You're not really, if you can see the range now, you're not really looking for a second entry. But you do get a lower high on a second entry off of this high. So you may take that as long as you got room to get back to the EMA there. And you can see it kind of bounced along there till it finally got to the trend line. And that confirmed that trend line. No setup there. And you do come back and no setup again. So unfortunately, when it finally does come back, you don't get a setup. And then you're just kind of chopping sideways. Now, I had somebody ask me, I remember while I was watching this in real time, I wanted to take this trade too. And let me show you some things about this trade, why you have to be really careful with it. First of all, it's still inside a possible trend channel. You don't get a break till here. So you got that going against you. Notice we just came off the trend line. And we came off the low and we worked back to the trend line, and things look really bearish because there's no correction up back to the trend line. We're just kind of going down to sideways. But notice how we couldn't even get back to the midline here. And if you do a measured move here as well, notice where it bounces. It's a measured move based on the width of that pink channel. I mean, it's almost to the tick. But notice that you couldn't get back to that midline. Notice that this is kind of in no man's land. But here's some more clues. It's a little bit congested. Maybe you treat that like a failed breakout of this congestion. But notice it doesn't break lower there. Then you get an inside bar and it doesn't break lower. And so by the time this sets up, that's a third entry and you got congestion. So there's no trade there. But somebody took, I think the person that sent me their chart, I don't know if they entered over here or if maybe they had a break below their bar there. But there's no setup on my chart you can take. But it was still tempting when it broke higher here because it looked like, hey, maybe there's a little trap. But then you got to recognize that congestion. And this probably works here. You probably still get out on a scalp. But I'm pretty sure this trader had a loser here. I think this is where it was. I'm pretty sure this is where it was. And I remember watching it in real time, and yeah, because it was right before we got the break. And so then you get the break of this green channel, and you break out of here, and you get two legs up to a new high. And so now you've got, there's basically a double bottom here, so now you got a second entry short and a big bearish bar. I like going short there. And really what prices are trying to do, this is the other clue that you got to learn. This is what I mean by context. The context is not saying short, because when prices broke lower here, they almost always come back and test this. And the market was really bearish, so it had to struggle, but it does. It comes back and tests it, and then boom, we're off heading lower again. So you had to, all these little clues, not getting to the midline, no break of this channel yet, no retest of this, congestion. There's just lots of little clues that says, hey, just sit tight and wait on a better setup. And then a few minutes later, you get a strong second entry on your first break of a really strong bearish trend that's been going straight down for a long time. And you know prices are probably going to retest this low. And they still had trouble taking it lower there, and I don't see any way to enter any of these. There is a little double, maybe even call it a triple test of this low here, but you got to go short at the very low of the day, even though it's a very bearish bar. It's just not a good move. So, and you already got a new low in place now. You've got a break and two legs down to a new low, so that's really risky. But when it just keeps going, I mean, I didn't mark any of these trades, but it's bearish as that is and as strong as that channel is, that's a really, really strong trend. It doesn't look like it, but you can see the corrections can't even really go back more than a tick or two, and it's just all bearish, and every time it hits that trend line, it drops. So technically, every time you came off that trend line with a bearish bar, you could just about go short. You see it there, and I've talked about this before. You know, you see, when you see these kind of trends, learn to recognize them. Every one of them would have been good for a scalp. Not a one of them would have failed. And I don't think I would have taken it right in here. It was, once you got on down here, it was pretty obvious. And we're real far away from the EMA, but this is pretty obvious. Even the first break, you get a good signal bar, boom, off it goes. I think this is about as far as you want to press it on these trades here. I don't think I would take this because you might get two legs back to the EMA. Then you get a break, move to a new low, and you get a spike and channel up here. And you're working higher, but you got to be real careful going short here. But the fact that the main blue channel has a break and a huge move down, this huge move down has a break and a new low. And then you got a spike up and you're working higher here and you get a reversal pattern here. So this is a double bottom. Then you try to go short once, twice, it bounces. There's plenty of room back here. You might try to scalp that. Honestly, I think you're better off to leave it alone. You could have got a scalp and maybe a little bit of a runner out of it, but look what happens real shortly later. Now you got a break of the green channel, 2 legs up, and you're going lower. I mean, it's tempting to go short right there, but it's kind of, again, you just came off the lows. You're kind of in that no man's land. You're above the EMA, so just wait and see what happens. And of course, you get a first entry and then a second entry right here, but it doesn't set up for a failure. It does come back here, and really that looks like all, and this is really sideways, so it doesn't, I mean, you could argue that maybe that looks like a leg down, but really that looks like the first leg down, and then there's your second one. So I don't think you can trade that as a failure. Then you come down and you get a first entry and you get a second entry, but it's congested. It's not quite back to the EMA. It would have worked. Just about anything works now. So you got a failure right here, but again, that doesn't look like a leg. So it looks like 2 legs here, and then you get a failure. So I'm treating that as a failure, plus you're also getting a first entry, second entry. And normally I'd tell you don't go short into that congestion, or not congestion, but that support right there. But with that trap still at the key entry point and heading, and this trend still being intact, I don't see why you don't want to take that trade. Of course, it runs on down a couple of legs down, and then we get a correction here, right back to the midline, and we've been you don't have a lot of evidence here that you've been turning down at the midline, but it turns down right at the midline, and we're not back down to the lows yet. So that could mean a couple of things. We actually came off the low here, so you would expect prices to be going back here. That's another reason I semi-marked that one. So the fact that we're coming down, we're not back to the lows, but we should have been headed to the highs. That's just how weak this market is. So you got to be, I still don't think you want to get long here, and you got to be careful getting short, but there's a clear second entry short here, and you're working up, and you kind of get a, that's not a convincing close outside, but you're probably going to come back to the EMA, even if it's going to go higher. And so maybe you take that trade right off the midline, but it drops on down and just kind of chopping around. I don't see anything in here to reason to go long. And then you get this overshoot. Notice you got this little channel working up. I didn't color it, but let's just give it a color there. And you get a close outside, move to a new high, and it turns down right off that yellow trend line. Of course, you may not have had that trend line yet, so that's the other problem there. You're just playing these short-term ones. But look how far away we are from the EMA. I like that one. You try to go higher once, twice. It's not really the type of reversal you're looking for, but this thing has been so bearish, any kind of move that you could look at as possibly trapping people, and it's obvious they trapped a few longs here, and look at that move down, and then the selling. I mean, that's probably the move of the day. It's a little aggressive, so I marked it green, but now we should be headed back to the other side of the channel. You got this short-term trend working down. You get a close outside. There was a second entry short there. I think that's too risky. It works, but you got to be real careful with it. And then, of course, you can see we're bouncing around. But notice you get a second entry short here, and it's a lower high. And it is right off that resistance. It's a triple test, too, because we tried to go higher there a few times. And so you can actually bring this back over here, and you got a triple test there. The second entry short. It's 2 legs back. I like that trade. Of course, it works, but then it bounces higher, and that's the concern. But this is a lower high, and it is a triple test, so I'm going to mark that in such a bearish market. But then again, we do push higher, and then we make a lower high, and this broke higher, and look how bearish that is. And again, you had to be thinking, hey, we came off the highs, and this is a very weak market, so we're probably headed to the lows. And this thing just rockets off again, and you probably get a runner there. Again, I don't see anything else down here, and then we're just chopping sideways again. And now we've come off the lows. There is a lower high here, and it's kind of a repeat pattern of this right here, except you actually get a first entry, second entry that fails. The problem is you got two bars here, and they got two matching lows. This did break a little higher. If it breaks lower, we're probably headed back to the lows. I didn't mark it, but it's one you could argue for, at least to be green. And again, it is a triple test as well. And of course, we bounce off the lows, but don't be trying to buy this thing. And then you get this big bearish bar, but I'd wait on a lower high. And you see it tried to make a come back higher and make a lower high. It actually does make a lower high here, but we've already been to the lows, so I don't think you can enter there. And it's getting late in the day here. You know, this is getting towards after 1 o'clock, and so we fell out the bottom. We run up here and we fell out the top, and this looks a lot like this setup here, except this closed a lot more bearish, and so it's a little bit of a repeat pattern. And notice what it did. You got a perfect measured move based on the pink range there. So, but it's just kind of out there in no man's land. It is congested. I just don't think you can trade that. I don't like it. And then we drop on down, and notice it goes a measured move. It bounces, and you get a second entry here, but no setup there. It's an inside bar. It's a doji. It's a very neutral bar. We do try to go higher once, twice, but again, it's congested. Yeah, you might get another leg down similar to this one, but I don't think you want to risk it, especially when you get an inside bar. So that's, even though this is your signal bar, you got to go short here. That's an inside bar with matching lows. It's just not a good setup. Not high probability. And of course, now we're just kind of chopping along. I did mark this one. Because you got two legs down, so it is a failed second entry long. The entry would be below this bar, and you can see how it just chopped along, and that's the reason, you know, we would expect prices to come back to here. But this thing's weak, and so you might risk that on a failure, especially with two clear legs down, and they look like they might even be pretty close to a measured move. And it is. It's pretty much a perfect measured move to a tick. So for that reason, I like that as a failure. Your entry, this is your signal bar, so your safety stop has to go above it, but this is your signal bar. And you can see you'd had to wait. I think you would actually got out on this first bar, but if not, you'd have got out before it bounced. And then you make a higher high here than the last two on the first entry, even though there's a hidden second entry. I don't think I take that. Wait on the lower high that comes here, and then it looks congested. It's right into the midline. We couldn't get down here the last couple of times. Couldn't get down there here. So what's happened is you just got some support going on right across here. So I just don't know that you want to go short there. I mean, there is room back to this support, to be honest, but the support's really kind of right there. And you can see it has to give you a second entry, but it's just sideways by that time too, so you can't really enter that as a second entry because it's just an inside bar. It works, but it's real risky, and I don't see anything in here. And then finally when it drops, there's no setup, and that just kind of takes you into 2 o'clock, and there's nothing else there either. So it's just there wasn't anything really much after about 1 o'clock that was worth risking. And the reason is the most of your traders are kind of wrapping it up here. The day's kind of ending, and even it's still real bearish, but there's just probably not enough selling coming in to push it all, to keep it really trending strongly. And it kind of did that all day. At times it would find some support, but once it got through it, it's off to the races again. Then it finds a little support or bounce, and it's off to the races. A little support, off to the races. It kind of did that all day. But the problem is you just don't know where and when it's going to go lower there, and you got to be careful with it and can't risk it. So anyway, very bearish day. Not a ton of trades considering how strongly this thing went down. But there's enough there that you only needed one trade probably today, because most of them, a lot of them had strong runners on them too. And so hopefully you could get you one trade with a good runner. And if you don't trade runners, if you're not there yet, then hopefully you got two quick, easy trades or two good trades and call it a day. But when you get days like this, try to get you a runner and just hold on tight and just hold on as long as you can. You know, don't let it ride out on some big correction here, because you might get burned and give it all back. Only it might bounce or something, especially once you got a break in this first new low. Once you know you're going lower, try to get on and hold on. Again, just don't hold on through any really large corrections like that or this one. But you know, a mild correction, you might hang on and try to get as much as you can out of a runner. So anyway, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to wrap this one up. We'll see what tomorrow brings. I mean, the support might give way and we may head lower again. Or we could bounce and go higher. Who knows? This is just one crazy market, and I just don't think the selling's over yet. But anyway, we'll wrap it up. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow. I'm done for today. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and we'll see you next time.